Hi, everyone, and welcome to Learning Data Live 2020. I'm Elizabeth Patterson, and I'm going to be moderating this presentation today. We have Jarod Sickler from Jorsek, who's going to be presenting DITA CCMS. What is it, why do you need it, and how to pick the right one. Learning Data Live is brought to you by Scriptorium, the content strategy experts. Since 1997, Scriptorium has helped companies manage, structure, organize, and distribute content in an efficient way. If you're trying to figure out how the DITA model can best support your content or you're setting up a DITA system, please contact us and we would love to work with you. LearningData.com and Learning Data Live would not be possible without the help from our sponsors, so thank you so much. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Attendees are going to be muted during the webcast, but we still want your input during the session. So if you have questions that come up during the session, there is a chat module and you can send a question. So we encourage you to send questions and then we will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Also, if you'll go ahead and locate that module now so that you know where it is, and also be on the lookout during the question and answer portion for a presentation link or for a link to our evaluation survey, and also a link to our email so that you can send in any additional questions. There's also a handout for this session. There's a PDF that Jarod has shared, and it is located in the handout section. It's a downloadable link, and I think it might also just appear in your GoToWebinar screen, but it is there for you for this session, and I know he'll be referencing that. All right, and with that, Jarod, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm all set. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass things off to you.
Thank you.
All right, you're good to go.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Elizabeth. Per my typical style for these things, I changed the title just slightly to more closely reflect what I want to talk about today, and how to best present it. So the DITA CCMS. So what are these things? Do you need one? And tips for picking the right one. So again, as you saw the other photo, this is just a bit about me. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Rochester, a customer success manager, and also the documentation manager at Jorsek, and we're the makers of EasyData. Okay, so agenda today, we're going to get moving quickly because we've got a lot to cover. But today we're going to go over what a DITA CCMS is and ought to be, how a CCMS differs from a CMS, whether a CCMS is necessary for managing data content, and what the benefits of a CCMS are, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for a Q&A at the end. Okay, so first off, what a data CCMS is and ought to be. So let's start with the definition. This is one I put together. We could tweak some aspects of this, but this kind of gets to the essence of what a DITA CCMS is. So a DITA component content management system is a content management system that manages all aspects of the DITA content at a component level. That's very general, but we're going to refine this as we go on a little bit, and we'll explain more of this. And the important point for right now is at the component level. So down to a very granular and minute detail, a DITA CCMS should manage content down to a very granular component level. But of course, what are components? So a typical way to think about these, and I have some small children, 3 small children actually, and so I think about Legos a lot. I think about content management, I think about my graduate school work, and I think about Legos often. It's important, my children wanted me to point out that we think of these as Lego bricks, not Lego blocks. That's a big deal, and they call me out on this a lot. But if you think about Legos, the bricks come in all different shapes and sizes. Some are large, some are small, some are specialized pieces that are used for 1 or 2 particular things, and some are very general pieces. These bricks can be combined in any number of ways to make something super cool, as my kids tell me all the time, that check out this cool thing they built. and they're often very colorful. They're built out of just a huge range of different pieces to make the cool toys that they want to build. In DITA, components can be words, phrases, paragraphs, topics, or even larger documents, larger chunks of documents, such as chapters. So you don't have to think of a component as a tiny piece, but you could think of a component as something much bigger. The point is really that you can take all of these different components, whatever size they are, and you can combine them in interesting and unique ways to create larger documents or larger deliverables. But all of these components or fragments of much larger pieces of documents, there are relationships between them, and those relationships require management. Probably none of this is new to any of you guys who are here. I mean, you're here because you understand some things about DITA, and this is all very normal, just stage setting right now for what's to come. But again, to emphasize, the important thing is the management between all those pieces. So once you start putting these interesting DITA pieces together to build larger deliverables, there has to be some management that goes into that. And so when you think about a CCMS, there are things that they ought to be, and there are certain functions that a DITA CCMS ought to perform. And one way to gauge what those things are and what the DITA CCMS ought to be is to come up with some standard. And that happened in 2015. A group of smart people thought long and hard about what content management in the context of a CCMS ought to be. And they created the ISO IEC IEEE 26531 standard. And the standard's title is Content Management for Product Lifecycle User and Service Management Documentation. Now, if I was particularly ruthless, I would just start going through this document point by point, and I'm not. I did read it. It's 50 to 60 pages of everything that a good CCMS ought to be and what functions it ought to perform. And I'm gonna highlight some of those in this. This link here, I think I can make these slides available. I'm happy to make these slides available, and there are links to the standard itself. If you want to purchase the standard through the ISO website, you can. And I think we have a link I think I've included a link at the very end as well. Okay, but the standard itself is a statement of the requirements a content management system ought to meet in order to be considered a good CCMS. It was written in 2015 in Microsoft Word, which was an intentional move, even if slightly ironic. But the main goal of that was to write the standard in such a way and basically not use any CCMS in particular to write it, even though it would have been a major benefit to write it that way, for a couple of reasons. One was to prevent any bias, because one of the authors was actually one of our co-founders, Casey Jordan. So in an effort to limit bias, they chose to write the whole thing in Microsoft Word, which also had the added benefit then of highlighting all of the things that you would want a CCMS to actually do. This important point. So a DITA CCMS is a CCMS that's specifically designed to handle all aspects of DITA content and its semantic markup. So they're designed to effectively manage those components both as independent resources. So if you think of a particular phrase or a word, a CCMS is designed to manage those those components as individual resources, so phrases, but also when that phrase is used as part of a larger content object. So a CCMS has to simultaneously manage it independently and as a part. So here's a quick quote from the ISO standard. This is page 36, clause 12.1. CCMSs are able to address and manage the individual components that are used to build larger content objects. The content object may consist of paragraphs, lists, and tables, as well as more detailed semantically named structures such as steps or notes, in conformance with the associated DTD or schema. The CCMS that can deconstruct large content objects into their components allows these components to be addressed and managed individually. Okay, so that's roughly what a CCMS is. We haven't yet talked about all of the functions that they ought to perform. But quick question is, is a CCMS different than a CMS? And yes, the answer is yes. Typically, a CMS manages content at the document or page level only, as opposed to the more granular level of the individual components that could make up a single page or document. Okay, so what a CCMS ought to provide. So what are the functions and what are the capabilities that a CCMS ought to provide? Um, First, assembly and linkage. A CCMS ought to provide full link management. This is incredibly important because, as most of you are, I'm sure, aware, when you are combining the components together into a larger document, you're not actually moving those components over, you're creating links to those components in this single repository. So you link out to different things, or so topic references in a map are links to those topics. So a CCMS needs to be able to handle those links. And this becomes especially important when you need to move a file from one location in a repository to another. A CCMS needs to be able to update that pathing information to maintain good links. You don't want the links to break and then have to go troubleshoot all that. So this needs to happen, though, from a phrase level all the way to entire deliverables. So if you move an entire document from one location in a repository to another, all of the linking information should update, and a CCMS should be able to handle that. And all the good ones do, happily. Okay, storage and retrieval. So a CCMS ought to track system-wide metadata on content and allow for custom metadata for a couple of reasons. One, this can be used to quickly find and filter content within the CCMS itself. It can also be something that's leveraged for your end user for filtering search results if that's a method you want to leverage at the end. But a CCMS needs to be able to track data about the content itself for quick storage and retrieval. Okay, transformation capabilities. The DITA content is not all that powerful when it's just DITA content. It needs to be able to be transformed into something. You need to be able to turn it into a PDF. You need to be able to turn it into an HTML. And a CCMS ought to be able to transform that content into some acceptable output format. This might happen in conjunction with third-party tools such as the DITA Open Toolkit or some other content delivery system that may be through an integration or APIs. Either way, whatever method used, the CCMS should have built into it the capabilities to do something with that DITA content, to turn it into something that an end user can consume. Okay, authoring and workflows. DITA CCMSs also ought to include some means of authoring the DITA content. Now that, again, that doesn't have to be built into the system itself. It could be via an integration with some other structured content authoring tool, or it could be included in the authoring tool could be included in the CCMS itself. We'll get to some questions and tips later on things that you can ask yourself about what your requirements are. And this could be one. You might not need a system that has a built-in authoring tool. Maybe you like one particular authoring tool, but you need that to connect up with an actual CCMS. And the CCMS should provide the means for you to connect that preferred tool up to the repository itself. Localization. You may not have any needs to localize right now. It may not be on the horizon for, in the near future, but a CCMS still ought to include the ability to at least minimally store translated content and the ability to compare that source language content with the translated content at the component level. So a good CCMS really should be tracking the source content, and then if you upload any localized content, it should track any changes between the two. So what I mean is, if you take a source document written in English, send that out for translation, and it comes back, and let's say it's been translated into Spanish. When that Spanish content comes back into the system should then track if there are any changes between the source content and the target, the Spanish content. If an author updates the English content, the system should let you know that there's been a change, where that change occurred, and then that way you can send out just that bit that you need to have retranslated instead of an entire document. So This typically happens at a topic level, so a topic changes and you need to resend that topic out. Version control. So CCMS ought to include the ability to manage multiple versions of a document. Looks like I have a typo there. Including histories of those versions. So the CCMS should maintain a rich audit trail of a document as it goes through its various versions, including branches of that content. So if you need to break off a set and have two sets editing side by side that are specific versions of that content, or whether the versions are occurring within that particular document itself without branching it, the system should allow you the ability to manage multiple versions of a document and track specific information about those version histories. It's also, I think, important to be able to have access to those versions to then, restore them or revert to them should that need arise. Okay, is a CCMS necessary for DITA content? No, it's not actually, but yes, it is. So what I mean is, there are options for you if you want to author your DITA content with an authoring tool and store it in some other non-CCMS system. You can do that. I'm not going to go through which systems you could do that in and which ones you can't. I'm not even going to give you names of all the different CCMSs out there, but you can do it. I have a colleague that I work with and keep in touch with regularly. Her organization recently gave up their CCMS and chose to go with a structured content authoring tool and managing their content in a non-CCMS. And she regularly relays to me the horror stories of trying to maintain a team of 10 to 12 writers that are all working on different sets of content but need to also share that content and reuse bits of content, and it becomes incredibly difficult to manage. In fact, they spend more of their time trying to manage the content that's existing and reusing it and updating all the linking information than they do actually creating new content for the products that their engineering team is producing. So the point is, without a CCMS, maintaining your DITA content becomes cost prohibitive and burdensome for the team that has to manage it. Again, think about the linking information. If somebody moves a file from one location in that content management system to another location, you now have to go and typically maintain a spreadsheet of where all those instances where that topic has been reused, where that file has been used, and then you have to go and you have to manually update all the file paths to make sure no links are broken. Okay, so some quick tips for gauging which CCMS might be right for you. Okay, tip 1, don't panic. Take a deep breath and relax a little bit. If you need to, stop, have a glass of wine, think about some things for a while, mull this over. Just don't panic. This has become my mantra when I'm engaging with trainings or doing even presentations, because a DITA CCMS can seem, and shopping for a DITA CCMS can seem overwhelming. So tip 1 is just don't panic. Tip 2, define your organization's requirements. Go through and ask yourself and try to define what your organization is doing, what your particular use case and business case are, and as that relates to things like assembly and linking, storage and retrieval. How do we want to access our content? A good CCMS is a single source repository. All of your content sits in a single environment, which is hugely beneficial. You're not storing content in multiple systems, multiple disparate systems. It's all in one place, and that's really one of the main things that makes DITA reuse possible, is that the content sits in one place and everybody in your team has access within reason, and there are restrictions that CCMSs can put in place, but within reason, your team has access to all of the content, all of your organization's content, and then you can leverage that reuse instead of rewriting or copying and pasting. Ask yourself, what are our requirements for transformation and publication? What do we need to do with the DITA content once we've created it? There's going to be some need to do something with it, and what is that? Okay. Authoring and workflows. Ask yourself, what authoring requirements do we have? What workflows are we going to need? All of these tips, and if you take the time to go through and kind of ask yourself these questions and build your use case and define your requirements, all of these things are going to help you when you go to choose and shop for a DITA CCMS. One bit of advice that is not exactly part of the presentation itself, but I want to offer up here is try to do as much of this as you can before you go shop. And this is really just to help you when you're out there and you're looking at the different systems and you're asking questions and you're in demos with all the different vendors. It's really going to help you to see what their systems are. If you come in and say, I want to see this and I want to see this and I'd like to see this, I'd like to see this, and our use case is, and you can lay out what that use case is clearly, it will help with whoever is giving you the demo, whatever organization is providing the demo for you of their system. They can then highlight those things that you most need to see, and it really will make the most of your time there. So try to define your requirements as tightly as you can, and then say, you know, maybe you have your core list of requirements. These are must-haves, and you can say, here are things we would like to have. Let's go through a demo, and please highlight to me the things that are must-haves for us, and if we have time, we'll get to the nice-to-haves. Again, define your organization's requirements as it relates to localization. Do you currently localize? How do you want to manage that content? How much of it do you have? How many languages are you translating into? And of course, version control again. Make sure that if you have version control, if you have versioning needs, make sure that you look at a system that has the version control requirements and specifications that you actually need. Okay, again, tip 3 is to don't panic. As you're going through this process, take multiple steps, multiple breaks, and not panic. Take deep breaths and go through all of this. Do your research. There's a lot of research that you can do on this, and don't get overwhelmed by it. People are out there to help you through this. Okay, tip 4, brainstorm a project plan. So you may not be in DITA at all right now. You know, it's possible that you've taken the Learning DITA courses, you've learned enough about DITA to go, this is really interesting, this looks really powerful, and I think it could really be a benefit for us, but you're not actually in DITA yet, you're not a DITA writer. If that's you, take the time to brainstorm a project plan, come up with an information model, come up with the rules and the requirements that you would have if you were to create, if you were to think about all of your organization's content within a DITA framework. Think about what that information model would be like. So ask yourself, do you have strict structural requirements for a document that you would need to enforce? Are there particular, do you have particular structural needs out of a document? Do you need a paragraph nested here? Do you need to list items here? What kind of list item? Does it need to be ordered or unordered? Are you documenting a product that has a lot of procedural information where you're giving step-by-step instructions? Are those used over and over? Are there particular phrases or particular things within a document that you want to be, let's say, you know, you want in the output to be bold, or you want to be, are there certain behaviors you want out of the content that you have? Try to come up and brainstorm as many of those as possible. There's a lot of good information online about information models and requirements that you might have. We are happy to help with that. Scriptorium is happy to help with that. So there's a lot of good work that you can do when you're brainstorming this information model. What authoring guidelines do you have? Do you need to enforce particular authoring guidelines, or do you want to enforce particular authoring guidelines on your writers? If so, do you have a mechanism in place that you're considering, or do you have one that you already plan to use? What is that? Filling out the answers to some of these questions, and then from each of these questions, you can spin off, you know, hundreds more. Do that. Sit down and just brainstorm, map things out, and say, These seem to be guidelines for us. These are requirements for us. These are must-haves. These are nice-to-haves. Think about metadata. Is metadata going to be a requirement for you for content discoverability for your authors in a CCMS and in a system, and for your end users, your readers? Really importantly, personally, I think, is to think about the product or products that you're documenting and sketch out a metadata strategy. And maybe it's a byproduct of being a perpetual grad student in philosophy, but I emphasize metadata and taxonomy strategy very much in all of my work. It's something I'm constantly thinking about because I find it to be very interesting. When you're documenting a product, you're asking yourself, when you're thinking about a metadata strategy anyway, you're asking yourself, what is this thing? How do I classify it? And how do I organize our content around that classification system? And that's really important. And then once you do that, and once you have kind of filled out what that hierarchy is and what that taxonomy structure is for what you're documenting, then you can look at systems, different CCMSs, and go, what are your metadata capabilities? And you can ask yourself, here's what we want to do, here's how our products break down, here's how we have different features within products. This is the taxonomy of what we're going to be documenting. Can your system accommodate that? Okay, and then also output formats. Again, this is also very important. It's not quite as ethereal as metadata strategy, but what output formats do you need? Do you need online help, PDF? Do you need to serve up that content to a chatbot? And can the system accommodate that? Okay, so what are the benefits of a CCMS? I put these in two very broad categories for benefits. First are going to be the quantifiable ones, the measurable metrics like the effort expended, which I think time is a subset, is a child of effort, and then also money. And then the unquantifiable. So these things are abstract and they're much more difficult to put numbers to, but they're things such as customer trust and team morale. Okay, so quantifiable. Let's start with some quantifiable benefits of a CCMS. So think about the effort invested into content management. If you're managing content, if you're heavy word users right now, you're probably going to be managing that content in something like, I don't know, maybe you're using Google Drive to manage all this, or maybe you're using Google Docs and you're managing all that content in Google Drive. You can't leverage the same level of reuse that you can in something like a CCMS with a DITA CCMS. And so since you don't have that level of reuse, but you want to move that direction, you're going to need a system that can accommodate that. And a CCMS can then eliminate the time that you would spend, the time spent for your writers of copying and pasting content from, say, Google Docs, from one doc to another. And then, if you have multiple versions of that particular document, you've got to now copy and paste that content across all of those to make sure it's all updated. A CCMS, you don't need to do that because it's a single source environment. You can update the content in one file, and then anywhere that file is referenced, those references automatically update as well. Because again, it's not multiple files across different sections or different areas in a repository. It's a single file that gets updated, and then those filter out. So again, a CCMS allows for structured reuse instead of a copy paste. And this results in dramatic savings in the effort that your writers are going to expend. And that effort, in this case, also is going to translate to time and money. So there's a book called Data Metrics 101. Mark Lewis demonstrates in that book that data reuse specifically, while it might take a little bit more time up front to create your reusable content, so content that's written kind of independently of this context that could be leveraged across multiple documents, it takes slightly longer to write those the first time, to write that reusable content. But after that content is written, you have a savings of over 50%, and that happens almost immediately, because then you can grab that content and you can reference it as many times as you'd like, instead of having to copy it, find the new file, paste that in, make sure those are all updated. There's going to be so there's a link here, and there's also going to be a link in the back to this book. Okay, another quantifiable benefit of a CCMS is that CCMSs will provide a full audit trail, an exhaustive document history. This should include every change that's left on a document. It should include, or any change to a document, including word changes, text changes, element changes, the way the structure of the document shifts and changes over its life cycle. And it should also include a history of all of the comments that authors and reviewers leave on a document. This can provide lots of different resources. So one example here is audit trails can be used to meet ongoing compliance requirements. So this could be the version of the document itself, or this could be something that's tracked with comments. You can see that particular engineers or particular people in an organization have interacted with this document and have said, yes, this looks good, and they've approved it and it's done. A good CCMS should be able to maintain a history of all of those interactions with the document. And then audit trails can inform decisions on future authoring methods, future content management needs, all of those things. So a rich audit history can really provide you with, some quantifiable statistics on how your organization might be using the document, what's the most beneficial, or what changes need to be made given what we've seen with our documents in the past. And again, audit trails can provide managers ways to understand their team's overall efficiency. So again, this goes back to maintaining that history and providing a way for managers to see what a document's history has been, who's interacting, how long it's taking them to interact with the document and perform their role. So say a reviewer, for example. Rich audit trails can provide managers ways to gauge that overall efficiency. You have reduced transformation and delivery costs. So a CCMS simplifies publishing, again, because that document itself is structured content, and that structured content is machine readable because it has a semantic markup to it, has the DITA semantic markup to it. A machine can take that, for example, the DITA Open Toolkit can turn that single document into PDF, HTML, EPUB. It can do that in a single push of a button. So instead of having to write now for PDF, write for HTML, write for an EPUB, you write DITA content once, and then you can generate all those others. So once you get the initial setup of the DITA Open Toolkit done, you can then publish out to all of those formats with a push of a button. So we did a survey in 2017, and the average non-DITA writer reported spending approximately 10% of their week formatting a document for publishing. And in the survey, we found that there are some structured authoring tools such as Word that can take up to 30% or more of a writer's time in any given week. So what we found was that writers who were not using DITA had to spend time not only focusing on the content itself and whether it was good and high quality content, they also had to spend a significant portion of their time on the formatting to make sure it looked right. And that can become cumbersome and burdensome as well. And a good CCMS will divorce those two things. It will divorce the content generation of the high quality content that's going to be consumed from the actual formatting. And again, the formatting is something that would get applied during publishing. In a DITA CCMS, that time is dramatically reduced or eliminated entirely. So once you get those output transformation processes in place, they're there and they're reliable and they're consistent. Translation and localization costs. So as I mentioned earlier, CCMS allows for savings on localization costs because we separate the content from the formatting, and then each translation, so then you can take those translations and you can use those same transformation processes we just mentioned to generate your localized content. And then the translation memory reduces the translation memory that's built into a system will reduce localization costs because it allows you to only send out the bits of content that need to be retranslated. You don't have to send out the entire document anymore. And lots of translation vendors will charge you on a per word or per document on a per document scale. So the result is that when you send them a 10-page document that might only need a few bits of translations updated, you have to send that whole thing to them, and the cost goes up because the document is bigger and they have to go through the whole thing. But if you know you've only had one small section of that document that's been updated with a CCMS, and it's tracking those changes, you can say, I'm going to send this single bit of content off for retranslation, and then once that one's done, I know it's all up to date. So again, only translate the portions that need to be retranslated. Okay, doing okay on time. So reduction in content maintenance costs. So the single source repository, all CCMSs, all good CCMSs have the single source repository. This is really the key that makes all of the reuse possible, that really provides a lot of the power to a CCMS, is this single source repository. So you can save time searching for the right content because you can leverage metadata for this, and all the content sits in a single repository. It's not spread out over multiple repositories. We found that the average interaction worker spends 19% of their day searching for content that was already created. Again, in the single source repository that's leveraging CCMS level metadata and custom metadata, users can put in a search term, they can get some results, and then they can filter those all in the same repository. There are no copies in this case, so there aren't copies upon copies that are proliferating in a single source environment. There are links to the original component. So if you write a single topic once and you know that you're going to use that topic in all of your deliverables, you write it once. You don't have to have a copy of it created that's included in all of those others. And a CCMS will store that and will manage all of that linking information out to all of those deliverables. The original component gets updated. All the documents that reference that component are automatically updated. So if you have a company name, let's say you're using your company name in a document, your company gets acquired, let's say, and the name changes. You can go to a single file with a single word that is your company name. You can change that company name, and it will change everywhere it's used in that single source repository. Okay, revenue generation through documentation. So this one is quantifiable. This is something that's still fairly new to companies like Jorsek, where we're just starting to gather this type of information. So, but documentation in a CCMS can drive revenue. We found that 94% of business-to-business buyers do online research before a big purchase, but interestingly, only 37% of buyers say that the supplier's website was the most helpful for the research they did. In our case, we found this to be the case. So we noticed that prospects were coming to our website. They would spend a little time there, but they would almost inevitably search for our documentation because they want to see, how are we maintaining it? What do we make available? What is the system actually like? There's a lot of stuff that you can learn on our website, but if you want to know the ins and outs of our system itself, you go to the documentation site, and that's going to be the case for a lot of these, for any of these organizations. So having a CCMS to manage your documentation about your products and then deliver it to people can actually drive your revenue, your organization's revenue, because it provides consistent, dynamic, and up-to-date multi-channel documentation that puts your best content into the hands of your buyers. Now, not every organization wants to have their documentation public. That's okay. But if you're one of those organizations that does, this can actually drive your revenue. Now for some unquantifiable benefits of the CCMS: customer trust and your reputation. Reputation takes a lot of time to build, and it takes very little time to destroy. A CCMS improves the accuracy of your content because it's a single source environment, so you don't have to track down all these disparate versions of a document, or these actual copies that live on individual writers' computers or their machines. You don't have to track all those down. You don't have to collate all the comments left on multiple versions of a document. Everybody can leave their comments on a single document, and this will improve accuracy, and it will improve time to market with critical documentation because it's going to minimize the amount of time that you have to spend managing that. Your readers will often consider your product's documentation as part of the product itself. They may not explicitly say this, but this has certainly been the case, anecdotally, this has been the case for us. Our customers, and those companies who have become customers have often reported to us, and this is one thing we ask them is, did our documentation have any influence in your decision to buy? And they said it did. And so we've come to conclude that the documentation that we provide is part of the system. It's part of our CCMS that we provide. It gives users a way to engage with it. Our users can go straight to our documentation site, find what they need, and more and more, increasingly more, customers are starting to assume that documentation is going to be part of what they're delivered when they purchase your product. So another unquantifiable benefit is team morale. Now, this isn't to say that you purchase a CCMS and team morale will automatically go through the roof and it's going to be sky high all the time. That's just not life. But I can speak from experience that with the taking on a good CCMS can boost team morale, especially when the CCMS actually does provide the things that they are supposed to provide and they do it well. So the psychological impact of having a good CCMS the psychological impact on your authoring team and your documentation team can really be significant. It can be a boost to their productivity, but also a boost to just their overall morale and their ability to get their job done and feel confident that they can do their job well. A CCMS can unify content teams or a single content team or content teams across an organization because silos break down because, again, you're in a single source environment. And content teams become critical to the rest of the organization as the documentation becomes more impactful. So as you produce higher quality documentation, the impact in the team itself becomes more critical to the organization because the organization can see the impact that the documentation is actually having. Okay, so to wrap this up and save some time for questions, why a CCMS? A CCMS isn't necessary to survive with DITA, but I want to argue that it's necessary to thrive with DITA because the CCMS is designed specifically to support the information and content development lifecycle from birth until that document dies and needs to be sunset. The CCMS is what makes that DITA content thrive. And CCMSs are unique in this way. They're designed to effectively manage the components, as I mentioned earlier, down to a word and phrase level, simultaneously as standalone resources and as pieces of larger document sets. Again, users have come to expect high quality documentation, and CCMSs enable you to thrive by giving you all the technological resources to provide that high quality content and that documentation to them. Okay, so a quick list of things to look for. Again, these are all things we've mentioned throughout this presentation, but here's a quick list for you guys to get down. So feel free to screenshot this or whatever you'd like to do. Look for structured authoring support. Single source repository, I'm not sure that there's a quality CCMS that isn't that. So, but keep that one in mind. Make sure there is full link management for all aspects of the DITA content. I would make sure there's some level of localization support. I would make sure there's a good metadata, support built into it. I would make sure that there is a very powerful search mechanism that leverages that metadata. As your content repositories grow, and especially if the CCMS that you adopt becomes starts to work into multiple departments within your organization, make sure that there's powerful search so that you and your team can find what you need. Make sure there's version control support, and I would also make sure that it's interoperable with other systems, so via integrations or APIs. Okay, questions? And I'm going to actually move on to the next slide so you guys can see links.
All right, great. Thanks, Jared. I'll leave you the presenter so that we can leave the links up during this question and answer period.
Sure.
So I know we've already got a few questions. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and send those in, and we'll go ahead and get started here, Jared. So the first question, is there an automated way to analyze and convert legacy content from, say, Word to DITA?
There can be ways. Some of these are better or worse. One thing that we've recently introduced and we've had pretty good success with it so far. In fact, I tested it out earlier today just because I was having fun. We've built a Word to DITA converter. There are some unique things about it. You know, it needs particular headings applied in the Word document to really generate good DITA topics, but there are ways to get Word documents converted to DITA in fairly efficiently. It really boils down to how heavily stylized that Word document is, and kind of what your requirements are for it becoming DITA content. But I would say that over the last year, it's for sure, I've seen advances in technologies that are capable of converting Word to DITA in more and more efficient ways, which is really that's really a good thing, and because there's a lot of Word content out there that could really be much more powerful if it was in DITA format.
Great, thanks. The next one, what is your opinion of open source CCMS systems?
Um, I think I would need a little more information on kind of like what that means. So I'm not 100% clear on exactly what that means.
Okay.
I know that here's an example. Our system is proprietary, obviously. Um, it's not an open source system, but we make sure that we don't include anything into the DITA content when users create content in our system because we are firm believers in open standards. Yeah, so it's tough for me to say. I don't if whoever asked this question has a particular system in mind, then I might be able to give a little more thoughtful feedback on that.
Okay. Well, actually, for the person that did ask that question, if you want to email experts@learningdata.com, my colleague will drop that into the chat box. Again, experts@learningdata.com. We can pass that along to Jared and have him answer that
Yeah, happy
with
to.
if you have a more specific question. So yeah, you can send that, and we'll go ahead to the next one. Are there existing CMS systems that are expanding into our integrating into or integrating a CCMS extension or component? And if that organization already has a CMS, is this approach recommended?
Good question. First, the disclaimer, of course, that it really depends on the use case whether this is a good move or not. I do know there are systems that are, kind of very broad CMSs, content management systems that are starting to include and starting to build CCMS specific components and parts for that. And they do include some integrations. I have to confess I haven't used them, so I can't speak to their how high quality they are versus, or pros and cons to them because I just haven't used them. Um, but I know that there are systems that are doing that. And I would say, I mean, my advice would be one, do your research and do your homework on what it's capable of and does it meet your use case? So if it doesn't meet your use case, it doesn't matter how good the system is, it's not going to fit for you. So make sure that you really do the best you can. Again, don't panic, but do the research to fill out exactly what your use case is and what you'll need out of a system. And then if there's a system that your organization is already using that has built a CCMS specific integration that's part of their larger product offering, if it fits your use case, definitely explore it.
Okay, great. Um, okay, so and then somebody followed up on that. Does this look like a general trend? CCMS is expand or CMS is expanding into CCMS.
Um, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I've seen, I think the CCMS market is the product offerings that are out there have been fairly consistent for the last few years. I've only been in this space for 3 years, but over those 3 years, I've seen a couple of other, I've seen some major CMSs start to add CCMS capabilities, whether that's through integration or a totally new product that will hook up to their larger CMS. I have seen a couple of companies that have started to do that. My only, again, this is me being, coming from academia. I work in all kinds of open source formats all the time, for my academic work, and then as well as for, DITA work. The one thing that causes me a little pause for some of those is that there can be a lot of proprietary markup that gets included in the content. And if that happens, this is what I consider a con. Others might consider this a pro, actually, but I consider this a con. If you go down the route with one of those, and then at some point you find out that this isn't meeting your needs and it isn't going to work for you in the long run, there's the possibility that you now have some proprietary bits of markup in that content that you're going to have to deal with during a conversion if you move to another system. That's one thing just to consider. Does the system include any proprietary stuff that locks me into that system, or does the system allow me to create content that is in effect system independent? That's something that's, again, it's go on an organization by organization case and ask if that makes a big difference to you or not. My personal bias is that I want to be able to move my content around into a system as I see fit. And here's a quick example that's a non-DITA example. My dissertation I'm writing in a system or in a markup language called LaTeX right now, or some people say LaTeX. There are a lot of open source tools for authoring LaTeX content, and I bounce around from tool to tool, or when a new one comes out, I test it out to see if it's something I like. The nice thing about all these tools is I can edit LaTeX content in Visual Studio. I can edit it in any of the tools that are LaTeX standard. And so I can actually take my same file and I can just open it in any of those tools and decide which of those I like the authoring experience of better. None of those are content management. Those are just authoring tools. But that's an example. I mean, I can take my single set of dissertation files and I can open them in any of those tools and I can go, I really like this one, but I wish it had XYZ. It doesn't. So I'll try this other one. And then I try that one and I like it. Or I can open those in some online tool that's a LaTeX editor as well. I think that's a real benefit to having content that's flexible like that, and not all the tools, not even all the CCMSs out there do that. So I find that to be a real benefit.
Great. I do have another one here. If you have a staff of only 2 technical writers who are just starting to use DITA, will that be enough of a team to manage DITA plus a CCMS, or will there need to be more people on the staff?
No, I think that there are ways to get into CCMSs that will provide you the tools you need for even a small team, such as 2 authors or 2 basically content teams of only 2 people. I don't think that I think it used to be the case that CCMSs were these big, heavy enterprise level tools only. It takes a lot to build a CCMS. As somebody who works with a development team that built a CCMS, it's a very labor intensive process to build and maintain. And with that, cost went up. Now I think the tools are maturing enough that the cost is starting to go down at least for access to get them with basic CCMS functions that you would need to author, manage, and publish content. I think prices are dropping, and I think the tools are becoming easier to use for small teams like that.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think as of now, we are out of questions. So if
Okay.
anyone has any additional questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the questions module now, so that we can answer those. And you can also send them to experts@learningdita.com, which is in the chat box. Also, my colleague Caitlin has dropped the link for the session survey in the chat box as well. So if you could take a minute to fill that survey out, we would really appreciate the feedback. So I don't see anything else. So I believe this concludes
Very
the
good.
session. So thank you so much today, Jared.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to. If anybody would like, that's still here, I would be happy to pass over these slides to Scriptorium, and you guys could distribute them if you'd like. If that's of interest, let me know. I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great. Yes, so if anybody is interested in these slides, again, just send that to experts@learningdata.com, and we would be happy to get those to you. So anyway, thank you guys so much for attending this session. Our next session is coming up in about 5 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and take a quick break here. But thank you again, Jared.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Have a good day.
You too.